A very warm welcome to everybody joining us today on our webinar series. It's a very special episode we have got today because we're going to be helping you stay safe and hopefully avoid getting hacked with some Wi-Fi security best practices. And we have the absolute honor and pleasure to have such an amazing guest on the show today, Mr. Phil Morgan. So actually, Mac, why don't you just do a quick round of introductions?
Of course, mate. Thank you very much. So we are Matt and Mac, directors of ECSE and product marketing, and Stu, that is a sales engineer in Americas region. And as Matt has said, we are extremely honored today to have Phil Morgan with us. And Phil, we appreciate that you have had a busy day. You were teaching a class. Is that correct? How are you doing, my friend? How was your day?
I'm doing great. I got a really great bunch of students. I think most of them are here, actually. They all said they wanted to come and attend this webinar, so should be fun.
Well, a special shout out to all of Phil's ECSE students that are attending the webinar today. So yeah, Phil is also one of our amazing ECSE instructors. Okay, well, without further ado, then we can get started with this webinar on security best practices. And Phil, take it away.
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is, despite what you may have heard about wireless or Wi-Fi, it's quite as safe as Ethernet, and it's arguably safer, but we have to emphasize when configured correctly. And that's the biggest problem. I really believe that we are not paranoid enough, and we don't always configure Wi-Fi correctly. We think it's safe, but the door's unlocked. So Wi-Fi is a broadcast radio. So not broadcast like we have with Ethernet. In Wi-Fi, everything is broadcasted from a radio. So everybody can hear it. Anybody can hear it within distance. And one of the biggest, scariest things is, if I had a bigger antenna on my reception system, I can hear you a lot better. So distance should never be a security strategy. Because if I increase the gain on my antenna, I can hear you from further away. I think the record, and this was specialist equipment, at one of the DEF CON or Black Hat, or they have a competition in the Arizona desert, so you can go the furthest. I think one guy actually went 250 miles or so with a Wi-Fi link, but of course he was heavily gained on the antenna. I'm not saying you're going to need to worry about 250 miles, but somebody across town can easily pick up the signal from your building. If you work in security, if you work in a government building or a military building, the bad guys and gals aren't going to be sat outside the building in a truck. They're going to be across town with hopefully, probably line of sight looking at your building. So distance should never be a security mechanism.
Yeah, that is some distance, Phil. Cool, 250 miles. That is crazy. Well,
that's specialist.
Yeah, that is insane. So what we decided we're going to do today is let's just cover some of the different types of Wi-Fi security methods that are available to us. And first of all, the first type we're going to cover is the open. And open is what you would typically use if you're maybe connecting to a guest network that has perhaps got a captive portal there for you to, put your contact details in and accept some terms and conditions to give you access to the wireless network. But what does that mean if you're connecting to an open wireless network? Well, that means you're not going to have any kind of authentication, so no layer 2 authentication, and also no encryption as well. So if you are sending anything to, let's say, an unsecured website, if someone is sniffing or capturing that wireless traffic, they'll be able to see everything that you're sending in clear text. So it's not necessarily the most secure. So watch out if you are using an open network. And then we have WEP, so wired equivalent privacy. And this type of authentication was something that's using called shared key, and it came out a really, really long time ago. And our recommendation here is basically don't use it because it's really unsecure. It can be cracked. How fast do you think it can be cracked, Phil? Less than a minute? Less than 5 minutes?
Well, it depends on the hardware that you're using. It can be cracked in, it's actually a function of the payload, how much data is being transmitted. So the more data that's being transmitted, the easier it is to capture what's called an interesting packet. So the problem is the reuse of the key is the problem. That's the science behind it. So the answer, Matt, is too quickly. How can it be broken too quickly, too easily?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So moving on from WEP, there was this another thing that came out called WPA, and effectively this was almost trying to stick a band-aid on WEP to try and come up with a slightly more stronger level of authentication encryption. And we added in something called personal or enterprise. Now, personal is something that you'd be very familiar with, a pre-shared key. So when you connect to a wireless network and you type in some form of characters, numbers, letters, etc. Then we have the Enterprise 802.1x, and that is going to be used if you're typically connecting to like a corporate network where it's going to be having some form of radius authentication that may or may not involve some servers and certificates. The encryption that is used here is something that's called TKIP. And yes, this was a kind of like temporary fix for WEP, kind of like trying to stick a band-aid over it. It's again, if I ask Phil, how long would it take to crack WPA key, he'll probably tell me too quick. So again, we don't recommend using WPA on any of your Wi-Fi networks if you do not need to for some reason. And one other little fact we just want to throw in here is that if you do have WPA enabled on your wireless network, this means that you'll be using only 802.11a, b, and g data rates. That means your maximum theoretical data rate that your device will be able to achieve will be only 54 megabits per second. So Mac, that was Open, WEP, and WPA. How about you cover the last half here?
No problem at all. So this was all easily breakable that Matthew has talked about, including open, that you don't even have to break into anything because it's, well, open. Now, the time has passed and we had to do something about the insecure methods of securing our Wi-Fi networks. So we came up with a WPA version 2. And by we, I mean it's a part of a standard, the addition. And WPA2 now fixes the RC4 TKIP that can be quite easily cracked. As Phil said, if you capture enough frames, you will be able to decrypt that stuff with a CCMP AES that is a little bit more difficult to encrypt, to decrypt, I shall say. And we still have the same two flavors to WPA version 2. We have PSK, that is password based, and 802.1, not .11.1x, that is a corporate grade security. And now with WPA2, the password is being used to both authenticate users and encrypt the traffic. So if you have hundreds of users using the same password and one person leaves the company, then you probably should change that password, because if that one person captures that traffic later on, they will be able to encrypt it knowing the password in any tool like Wireshark, for example. And .1x is still considered a very secure solution in WPA2, even though we have a newer version now that we'll talk about in a second. So WPA version 2 still going strong and still fairly secure. I mean PSK if it's long and if it's not known by everyone that it can be secure. And .1x, very secure still. Then the next thing that we have on our list is Enhanced Open. And Enhanced Open is a newish introduction to our choices when it comes to securing our Wi-Fi networks. Many of us think that it's a part of a WPA version 3, but it is not. It's a separate thing. And Enhanced Open is similar to Open for user from end user's perspective. They just hit the open network and they do nothing else. Their devices, they connect to the network as they normally would while connecting to open network. The difference is that Diffie-Hellman algorithms are being used in the background, and every single user will have their own keys to encrypt their traffic, and therefore it is encrypted but not authenticated. So it's better than open, right? You go to Starbucks and then your traffic is encrypted. And then last one is WPA version 3. And it's a big deal because it is mandatory in 6 gigahertz. That's one thing. And then another thing is that WPA3 replaces PSK with SAE. So SAE, it stands for simultaneous authentication of equals. And now it also uses Diffie-Hellman in the background. So even though you might have the same password to get into the network to authenticate your users, each user will then have their own key that is not tied to that password. So if me and Matt are using the same password, I won't be able to decrypt his traffic and he won't be able to decrypt my traffic if we are capturing each other's traffic over the air. So that's a massive, massive improvement there. And now when it comes to 802.1x enterprise grade security, the only real change is that we can use 192-bit keys instead of 128, but in reality, it's just like a military grade security. So it's not as important to us end users. And the massive thing in WPA3, lastly, is it enforces management frames protection. And we will be talking about that in more detail later on.
Before I move on, since I've seen a little bit of conversation come up in the chat, now might be a good time to address, hey, Phil, if I hide my SSID, that makes it more secure, right?
No, it makes me interested because I want to know why you're hiding your SSID.
Yeah, so is that a little bit of a myth we could just bust quickly about hiding SSIDs, make them more secure?
Absolutely. MAC address authentication and hiding your SSID is a complete waste of time. I can bypass both of them in about 10 seconds.
Okay.
If I can make a quick comment, what I want to say about security is it's very important. I don't know if you guys can see the video, but you just saw me doing something over there on my phone. Security is incredibly inconvenient. I have the slides over on my left, and it just said to me, you're timed out. You need to log in again. So I just logged in again. Then it said, oh, but you need to use your secondary authentication. Type in your, so I was scrambling on my phone. And if you just saw me panicking for a minute and you asked me a question, Matt, and I was, yes, because I was trying to get the slide because security stopped me working. That's the problem with security in our world. People will try and bypass it and they will try and speed past it. And so
Phil, don't worry, that happens to the best of us, my friend. That happened to us at the last WLPC during the live presentation. It kicked us out and we had to re-authenticate.
yeah, and it's inconvenient. So the first thing we want to talk about now, but going back to the slide, is that everything you were doing with security is advertised by the system. The system screams out, this is what security I'm using. It has to do that so clients know how to connect to you securely. So the clients know what security to use is advertised out in the RSN element number 48. It says, are you using pre-shared key? Are you using 802.1x? All of it is screamed out and freely advertised. It can simply be picked up by any type of scanner.
Since we were talking about the open network, we wanted to just give you a bit of a visual demonstration of the process of a client device associating to an access point that is connecting to an access point's SSID that has open authentication encryption for the SSID. So the process for a device to connect to any access point is they're going to need to discover this device, whether it's via a beacon frame or when they send out their probe request and they get a probe response. The client device is going to go through something that's called open system authentication. And this is when the device is going to send an authentication request to the access point. The access point then responds back to the client device with an authentication response. The client device will then send an association request followed by an association response. And what you see here in this example is that now once we've gone through this process, we exchange data. This is because there is no authentication or encryption on this SSID. But let's take a look at pre-shared key. Mac, you can walk us through this one.
But before we go there, let's answer some questions because they are starting to pile up a little bit. So we have some questions in both a chat and Q&A. Guys, I encourage you to put your questions in Q&A, and if more people they find them interesting, upvote them, then we will see them towards the top of the list and we'll answer them live then. Okay, so first question, does hiding SSID reduce probing? So I think like what you mean is if it reduces the beacons overhead, and the answer is no. If you hide SSID, then the beacon overhead will be the same. And then when it comes to probing, when the SSID is hidden, then its name will not be included in beacons, will it? It will be empty. It will still have beacons, but it will be empty. So your device will have to send a question: is there anyone out there with this particular SSID? I need to know the name of the SSID. But the second that any device connects to a hidden SSID and I capture this frame exchange, I will know the name of that hidden SSID. So I hope that answers your question. Then another question is, enhanced open or WPA3 mandatory for Wi-Fi 6 in 5 gigahertz? Good question, and I know it's confusing. It's Wi-Fi 6, 6E, 6 gigahertz, and yeah, it's a lot of things that can mix up in our heads. And the answer is that you can use WPA3 as part of Wi-Fi 6 in 5 gigahertz. You don't have to, you can. You can stick to WPA2, you can use WPA3, but when you use WPA3, then the management frame protection becomes mandatory as part of WPA3, but you don't have to use WPA3 in 5 gigahertz. You, however, have to support WPA3 in 6 gigahertz, okay? I hope that this answers your question. And the same goes for enhanced open. Enhanced open can be used on both 5 and 6 gigahertz network. And then another upvoted question was, can a protocol analyzer decrypt WPA3 PSK? And why won't someone else answer this question? Phil, do you want to answer that?
Sure.
So I'm not stealing the show.
So it all comes down to something called the PMK, the master key, the pairwise master key, that is the granddaddy key of all your other keys. WPA3 mandates that everybody gets a unique PMK. We're going to talk about this in a few slides. So if you know the PMK and you capture the four-way handshake, you can enter the passphrase. If you know the passphrase, you can enter the passphrase into Wireshark and it will decrypt the frames for you. WPA3 delineates the creation of the keys from the pre-shared key. So WPA3 is instantly millions of times better, and you cannot decrypt it. Technically, if you could capture the actual key that was used for encryption, but you would have to do that for everybody, for every session, which nobody's probably going to do. So no is the short answer.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, let's crack on with the rest of slides. I do remember one question in the chat now to discuss: when is it recommended to use enterprise security over PSK? So we will come back to that later. It's a very good question, especially if you are at the beginning of your security journey, right? Okay, so Matthew has talked about the frames exchange in open, no encryption. So in personal PSK, when we are using just a passphrase as part of WPA and WPA2, the initial frames exchange is the same. We go through discovery, then we go through open system authentication. That is always successful. Then our device sends association request, to which it gets association response. So that's the same stuff. But now we don't pass unencrypted data at this point. We have to go through an additional frames exchange that is 4 frames, and we call that four-way handshake. As part of four-way handshake, based on the PSK, our password, we derive the PMK, from which we derive the PTK, and that we use to encrypt the GTK. It's a lot. You can, spend entire webinar talking just about the keys derivation. So let's not go there. But the long story short, as part of the four-way handshake, you will have keys that you will use, that your devices and access points will use to encrypt both unicast and broadcast and multicast traffic. So it cannot be eavesdropped. And that's the difference. Okay, that was PSK. How about EAP stuff? So up to you, Phil.
So one of the key requirements of WPA2 was that both sides of the link should be authenticated. So all RSNs, robust secure networks, from the RSN element that we talked about, have to authenticate both sides. And that's what the pre-shared key is doing. Knowledge of the pre-shared key assumes that you you are authenticated and you're allowed because you know the pre-shared key. And we all know how that works. So to knock it up a level in the enterprise world, you have 802.1x and EAP that usually involves the use of a radius server, and you have certificates and user authentication. So typically the radius server is authenticated by the certificate and the client is authenticated by some other means. If you have EAP TLS, you have your own certificate, very difficult and expensive to manage. You could just use your Microsoft AD username and password, which is very easy and simple to do. So 802.1x and EAP is enterprise grade security, which is a lot more secure than pre-shared key or personal security. Pause, comma, when configured correctly. And the biggest weakness with 802.1x EAP is if you click the checkbox that says, do not authenticate the certificate, or if you allow people to install their own certificates, 802.1x becomes as secure as web, because you break the people and the system. There's a hack that we do a lot with WPA2 Enterprise, where we do a person in the middle attack, where I pretend to be your radius server, you connect to me, pretending to be your AP, and it says, oh, the certificate has changed. Are you happy to reinstall it? And you look at it and it looks the same. And most technical people aren't experts on certificates. So most users go, sure. And they click it. They click, yeah, let's do it. And now I've got you. I've now broken and I own you. And you happily type in your username and password. And on my screen, up pops up, Phil Morgan, password 123. It actually gives me your username and password. So making sure that we lock this down and tie this down and do it properly is very important. So it's not using WPA2 Enterprise, it's using WPA2 Enterprise securely. And that adds another level in the middle, at the end of the association, in between the four-way handshake, you have an authentication. And we are very guilty in the technology world of reusing the terminology. The authentication at the first step, the red one, can I come in? That's all that's doing. Real security authentication takes place in the middle purple one, the 802.1x EAP authentication.
Yep, and just before we move on, let's very quickly, let's discuss when would we use the enterprise versus PSK, because that's a very important stuff. And then I would also add, what is the difference between different EAP flavors like PEEP or EAP TLS, for example, and how can you hack or cannot hack both? Which one is more secure? And what is the common mistakes when it comes to implementation of all of that? Okay, Phil, so can you answer a first question? Personal versus enterprise. When? Can you use personal in enterprise?
You only need to use enterprise when you want your data to be secure. If you don't care about security, use pre-shared key. Of course, I'm being really, really flippant and sarcastic now because I'm British. You guys get that, right? A lot of people think the pre-shared key is good enough, and it's just not. I used to do some Ethereum mining, and I bought a little machine that mines Ethereum. Okay, my wife said she doesn't mind because it's cheaper than golf. Okay, it doesn't make any money anymore, but it took me 5 seconds to break an 8-character pre-shared key password. So let me just say that again for all of you that were looking at the window. It took me 5 seconds to brute force an 8-character password. Now it was, it started with a capital C and it was Candy123, right? Common password that I use to demonstrate how not to use passwords. But it took 5 seconds to brute force that password. It said that if I wanted to go through the entire, all combinations of capitals, lowercase, and numbers, it would take 3 days. Now, anybody can afford a device that can take 3 days to break passwords, okay? Now, when I made it a 10-character password, it was going to take 3 months. When I made it a 16-character password, it was going to take 3 years. So complexity is good, but complex 8-character passwords are not good enough. We need longer passwords, and then pre-shared key is quite safe. Of course, as long as whenever anyone leaves the company, you change the pre-shared key, Mark, right? The reality is...
Well, hopefully.
Well, no, that doesn't happen. No one does that. So the problem with the pre-shared key is everybody that knows it can get into your network and can capture and decrypt your data with WPA2. So if you want security, you should look at WPA2 Enterprise. If you use WPA2 Personal, everyone, every time they connect, has the same PSK, therefore they have the same granddaddy PMK. If I break your passphrase, I know your network now, in the past, and forever. Short passphrases are very easy to crack. WPA2, every time everyone connects, you have a unique MSK that leads to a unique PMK. So it's infinitely more secure. But it costs money, it has overhead, and you have to implement it properly.
Okay, Phil, very good mention in a chat about the PPSK, MPSK, IPSK, whatever vendors they call that. So when you have a solution where everyone or a group of users, they have their own password to access the same SSID, that's fine, it's possible. It can be secure if users, they don't know each other's passwords. So if someone cracks one password, they will have access to just this one conversation between a user and an access point. My question here would be, it was all nice and roses in WPA2. Does it still work with WPA3? Can we use MPSK, PPSK, IPSK in WPA3?
That's not the simple question. The real question is, can we use multiple PSKs, which is a great idea and a great idea from the vendors, because when Susie leaves, you just disable a PSK. And then you haven't even got to offboard her computer. So that PSK no longer works. It's a great idea. The problem is fast roaming is designed to work with WPA2. WPA3 with fast roaming and PPSK has not been fixed by the vendors yet. So you can have WPA3 and PSK. You can have fast roaming and, PPSK. Fast roaming and PPSK. What you can't have is WPA3 and fast roaming and PPSK, and it will be fixed. The vendors are very clever. They will fix it. But the IEEE and the Wi-Fi Alliance don't say how to do something. They say what needs to be done, and the vendors have to play catch up with clever ways to get around the problems. So it's the triple whammy, Mac, of PPSK, WPA3, and fast roaming that is the current thing we're trying to achieve.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Phil, for answering that question. I hope this answers the question for the audience. And let's crack on.
So WPA3 is just awesome. It was designed to fix WPA2. When you consider that WPA2 came out in approximately 2004, it's very old now. Okay, we were all still using like G back then, maybe just getting into A, and maybe we had a Pentium. iPhones didn't exist. So WPA2 was invented for a different age. WPA3 is the next generation. It's called robust authentication. You got increased cryptographic strength, stronger passwords. It stops the use of legacy protocols. It mandates the use of protected management frames. Protected management frames means I can't, as a hacker, tell you your systems to disconnect. If you're not using PMF, I can make all your clients disconnect. Hey, you got to leave now because I pretend to be your AP. PMF stops that. PMF requires secure exchange of information to mean only your real AP can give you a command that says disconnect. There's a transition mode, because the problem is when you go to WPA3, only WPA3 clients can connect. So there's a transition mode, which sounds like a good idea, but we'll see that it's probably not. You've also got forward secrecy. So even if I know your passphrase sometime in the future, I still can't decrypt your data that I captured. It's easier to use and onboard. In fact, most users, if their device supports it and the administrator turns on WPA3, they don't even notice the difference. Higher level of protection, and there is this super duper military grade, everyone calls it military grade, optional minimum 192-bit TLS Suite B, CSNA are all the words we throw at it, loads and loads of acronyms. It's a very, very high level Wi-Fi security system for governments, military, banks, anyone that wants a bit more than standard WPA2 enterprise. Someone just typed in, I'm military grade, yes. So summary, WPA3 fixes the problems with WPA2, and it's super duper mega awesome. So if the last slide was too much for you, use this one.
Okay, so let's quickly talk about the frames exchange with WPA3 SAE that replaced the PSK. Okay, we have no PSK in WPA3 world. So if you do a capture, you will see that the initial authentication, the open authentication, 2 frames, that was always successful, is replaced with SAE authentication. That's where the Diffie-Hellman stuff starts, okay? And then we have association request and association response. And then we still have four-way handshake, at which point every client will have their unique key to encrypt the traffic. Again, every client will have a unique key. Even if they're using the same password, the encryption keys will be different. So the authentication is the same, the encryption is different. And that's a big difference. Okay, does WPA3 still use AES? Yes, it does. And another thing that I wanted to very quickly discuss before we run the poll is two flavors of EAP. I've seen some questions about the PEEP, and I've seen some comments about EAP TLS. It's very important to understand both of them, which one is more secure and how you can attack them, since this is a hacking webinar. So let's start with EAP PEEP because it's easier. EAP PEEP, it requires to have a certificate presented by a server only, not by a client. So you don't have to do anything to your client, okay? When the client wants to connect to EAP PEEP secured SSID, then you will be presented, the client will present you with a prompt, typically username and password. And this username and password typically will be your AD credentials, for example. At the same time, your device will check the certificate that was presented by a server when the device was connecting to the network. And if the certificate is trusted by this particular device, then the device will just ask you for credentials, you put them in, you connect, and it's either go or no go. Credentials were correct or not correct, life is good. But if the certificate is not trusted by your device, then what's going to happen? You will be shown by your device a warning that, come on, man, before you continue, I do not recognize this certificate. It can be dodgy. Do you really want to continue? You say yes. Then you are being asked again, really, are you sure that you want to continue? And then what would users do? They always say yes. And then you connect to a network that can be your corporate network, but it also can be a honeypot network. It can be the case that you are connecting to an artificial software access point that was brought by a hacker to your site, or a guy that is even sitting outside of your building, but just uses directional antennas to provide higher RSSI to your clients than your corporate access points. All it takes with no WPA3, for example, is to send a deauthentication frame to knock off all the clients from the network that hear that the authentication frame on this particular channel, and then present them with better options, stronger SSID, stronger RSSI, sorry, and they will be tempted, and most of them, they will connect to the attacker SSID, and they will use that honeypot to harvest your ID credentials, for example, to then gain access to your email and other services, which is deadly, right? So that's another very good recommendation to always use 2 steps authentication. Even if your password has been hacked, you still have your application on your phone, right? It's important. And now, how do you secure yourself? How do you defend yourself from the honeypot attacks like this? I would say it's easy, but not that easy, not with all the vendors and all the networks. You need to have the IPS solution, right? So intrusion prevention system that stops the attacks from happening. So that was EAP PEEP and EAP TLS, assuming that you have, yeah, go on, Phil.
So there is something very, very important in what you said. Yeah, you said it's easy to use PEEP. It's easier than using EAP TLS. And that's the problem that people don't get, okay? You have to install a certificate on the client. So when the EAP PEEP is sent down the certificate, it validates the certificate. And most companies do not do that. what they do is they say to the clients, hey guys, you got to onboard it. Here's the process for onboarding. Connect to this device. When it offers you a certificate, say, yes, I trust it. That embeds the certificate. Now, from now on, what you do is when you connect to the Wi-Fi, when it gives you a certificate, it'll be automatically be trusted. And then they say, never, ever, ever click yes, trust the certificate, except the one we just told you to do. And so they're training their users that it's okay to trust the certificate. And that's the problem with most implementations of EPEEP. You should get the devices brought in, and they should onboard you to the system by installing a certificate. This is the only certificate that will be used to connect me to Corp Wi-Fi, and it will only do the following things. Most companies don't do that, which is why the attack that you said, Mark, is so easy to do. And also, most users, if you keep on asking them, reinstall the certificate, I've got a project, I've got to get in by tomorrow. Most users will say yes, even though they've been told to say no. And that's the problem. And this is why, what you're going to say now, this is why TLS is so much more secure, because you can lock this down.
Yep. Okay. So thank you very much, Phil. We will talk a little bit more about how to crack EPTLS next. So EPTLS is considered the ultimate security of Wi-Fi. So let's run a poll, and the poll question is, what is your biggest concern when it comes to security? A, configuring my Wi-Fi networks securely. B, rogue access points trying to spoof my network name, my SSID. C, I don't know how to identify non-Wi-Fi interferers. D, not being aware of the constant changes to my environment.
Okay, we'll just give it a few more seconds, give everyone a chance to make sure you submit your answer for the poll question, and then I can share those results with you. What you'll be able to see is that the big number of people in the audience said that configuring my Wi-Fi network securely is their biggest concern. And that's completely fair enough. We're going through so many different flavors of security and authentication and methods. I can understand why it could be a little bit confusing or a little bit daunting on how we should do it. Hopefully by the time we get to the end of this webinar, you will feel a little bit more comfortable with that. So why don't we carry on and move on to the next slide, and where I can talk in great detail about all the differences between WPA2 Enterprise and WPA3 Enterprise. And it'll probably take me to the end of the webinar because there's so much to say. Just joking, it's not that different really between WPA2 Enterprise and WPA3 Enterprise. Phil and Mac did mention it earlier. Pretty much one of the biggest only real differences is that you have that optional 192-bit cryptographic strength that you can use if you would like to, and it's going to be great for government, military, healthcare, and finance. And the other thing to mention here is that protected management frames, they cannot be disabled. So I was only joking about it taking a long time to get through this one.
So I'm aware of the time, everybody. So OWE is fantastic. You're at your favorite coffee shop. You're unencrypted. Not anymore. If your hardware supports it, you go to the coffee shop, you will get an encryption key, and your data will be securely encrypted using OWE. It's just turn it on and use it. If your device supports it, you've got encrypted data on an open network. That's all there is to it.
Great. So the issues and the problems with WPA2 Personal is that WPA2 Personal Appreciate Key is that everyone, they know the once you know that password, you can then put that into your protocol analyzer and you're going to be able to decrypt it. Any of the unprotected traffic going to non-secure sites or unsecured email servers, etc. Phil and Mac made a great point earlier that if someone does leave your company that knows that appreciate key, you should be changing it, because like they said, you don't have to be physically there in the environment to be able to hear the wireless frames being sent. You could just be nearby or on an adjacent floor, for example.
So
just to kind of add on that quickly, just to kind of break it up a little bit here, guys, is that when you talk about changing passwords, sometimes it's actually not just when someone leaves, but rotate them monthly or every so often. Because if you have to use it, just do it, because that way it helps in that strengthen a little bit of that security.
You know
As
what would be a
rotate.
great poll question, Stu? When was the last time you changed your pre-shared key? I think most people would not answer.
You'd be surprised at last week.
Because you know better, Stu. Well done. Yeah. Someone just typed in never.
Too many guests in the house. How about that? Like with kids. Let's put it there.
Okay. Let's
changing the PSK would ruin my family relationships.
Yeah. How about some quick tips, Phil?
Just briefly what you talked about, the real problem is all your kids' friends knows your pre-shared key at home, right? Because when their friends come to visit, they give them the pre-shared key. So that's the problem. So one thing you can do to defend yourself is to use a WIPS, wireless intrusion protection system. Okay, know your environment, know what is normal, know what is abnormal, detect and remove interferers. Interferers is the bane of our life. If there's an interferer going on, is it a microwave oven? Hey, why is this interference on the same channel as our AP? It's knocking all our clients off the AP. That's more likely to be a hacker. PMF should be turned on. I see some questions coming up about what devices support this. WPA3 comes with OWE. OWE isn't a part of WPA3, but any device that supports WPA3 should support OWE. They should support PMF, but we need devices that can find what is normal and abnormal.
Yes, and you mentioned about RF interferers, and there are tons and tons out there, lots of different types of devices that can cause you interference on your wireless network. And what we mean by this is non-Wi-Fi interference, so affecting our devices at the layer one, the physical layer, creating that energy on the spectrum. We can see we've got everything here from a microwave oven all the way through to different kinds of cameras or headsets, gaming controllers, Bluetooth, and also a Wi-Fi jammer. So when we're talking about being hacked and security, I think that would be quite a good one to take a little bit of a deeper look at, because why would this be a concern, Phil, if someone came in and turned on a Wi-Fi jammer in the environment?
The jammer will jam everything on that channel, and you can see this is a wideband jammer, which is jamming the entire 2.4 gigahertz frequency. Jammers, sometimes hackers will use a jammer for spite, just to be mean because you've defeated them. But more commonly, a jammer will be used to stop a function which causes a client to do something else. So if I jam channel 6 that your AP is on, and you move to channel 11 that my AP is on, I've just made everybody connect to me. So jammers are like the first level of attack to make clients do what you want them to do. And a wideband jammer would kill everything on 2.4 gigahertz in this instance.
Bring a jammer to a dinner party, make everyone talk to each other. That made me laugh out loud. There's a nice comment there. So then, well, like, what would you say the key lessons and takeaways from that then, Phil?
We should use WPA3 as soon as possible. I'm aware that it's client dependent. Absolutely. Do not use transition mode. But transition mode allows the WPA2 clients to connect to WPA3. But you all get that you are now running WPA2, right? We just told you how weak WPA2 is. It's easy to attack. If you turn on WPA3, but allow WPA2 transition mode, I just attack you in WPA2 mode, and it's exactly the same. We all know you should use a different SSID for each frequency. Use a different SSID for WPA2 and WPA3. So have dedicated WPA3 networks for all the clients that can support it. Then have a dedicated WPA2 for those devices that can support it. And we really need to encourage people to upgrade and companies to upgrade to WPA3. It is infinitely more secure. And I was working with a customer the other day, and I just tested it in passing. I showed them how easy it was to attack their WPA2, and they were using the same password on the WPA2 that they were using on the WPA3, which is like just pointless. So basic security needs to come in here as well.
Yeah, great. Well,
okay, yeah, we have discussed, or we have asked you guys, what are your biggest hurdles when it comes to security? And now we'll show you how you can use Ekahau to defend yourselves against those security issues. So first of all, you can see easily what security is being used on your SSID. So we will show you Ekahau Analyzer for that. Check for PMF, MFP. There was a good question in the chat. What is the difference between them two? And the answer to that is just a name. PMF protection of management frames. It's a standard name, MFP, management frames protection. It's a pre-standard Cisco name for the same thing. You will also see that in Analyzer. Easy tool to look for rogue APs. Well, you will see that easy peasy. You can use Ekahau to see rogue APs, multiple tools actually. Easy tool to find interferers. Same stuff, we just need to have our trusted sidekick with us and can capture traffic archive. Look for the outs. Okie doke, let's take a look with more details. So what we see on the screen here is a capture from our amazing application called Ekahau Analyzer. For those of you that are not familiar with this application, this is the on-the-spot troubleshooting tool that you can use your phone or a tablet to run it on, and you connect your sidekick to your mobile device, and then you have access to not only spectrum analysis, but tons of data captured in the air from beacons, okay, tons of it. And there is a new view, Matt, move to the new slide. There is a new view available to us that is called the network overview. We also call it the expert mode, where you can see quite a lot of fields that you couldn't see before. And now it's extremely powerful to just take a quick glance at the screen of your phone or a tablet and see how your network is configured without even checking your, I don't know, wireless LAN controller or your cloud dashboard. You see the security, data rates, you see amendments, KV and R enabled, disabled, the channel utilization on a logical and a physical level as reported by the access point and measured by a sidekick spectrum analyzer. So it's absolutely smashing. You can become hero, honestly, 30 seconds after getting to the site without having to log into anything. You just look at it and you can tell your client straight away about the high level of their misconfiguration on their controller. Then, of course, you will do the survey to see how everything performs from the physical perspective, but combining a survey with a very powerful troubleshooting tool like this, you can very quickly see what is wrong with your Wi-Fi network.
Can I jump?
And now on the screen, yeah, go on, Phil.
Yeah. So just in case you didn't pick it up, I just told you should use a WIPS. Mark just told you how you can use your Ekahau Sidekick and product software as a WIPS, right? WIPS can be incredibly expensive. You can just do a walk around the building running this tool, and it is the fundamentals of a wireless intrusion protection service. It will show you what's doing what is misbehaving, and then you can turn on the scanner and look at the frequencies to see if you've got any jammers and stuff going on. So the Sidekick gives you the fundamental performance of a WIPS out of the box.
Wonder if people could guess whose network we were scanning to get this demo together. Any clues on the screen? Wonder if we'll be able to see. Okay, so using the network overview and analyze application, amazing to see that information as well, like being able to see WPA3 SAE versus WPA2, but we can also leverage our other tools, so the survey application and inside of Ekahau and inside of Ekahau AI Pro, to identify if we've got any interferers in our environment. So we've gone for our walkabout with our Sidekick or Sidekick 2, and we've captured that data, and we're currently looking at the interferers view on the Ekahau AI Pro, and we can see that we've actually got a few Wi-Fi cameras working in this area, and we can see the area of impact, and we can see that the devices are working on channel 1. So we've highlighted where we are on the map kind of right now, and we're just digging a little bit deeper into that specific data point. So why is it not only a security vulnerability if we've got these types of devices in our environment, but it's also detrimental to the performance of our network? If we were trying to use 2.4 gigahertz in this area, it's because these devices, they are typically constantly transmitting. And what that means, if they are constantly transmitting, is that they're taking up all of the available airtime. So if you take a look at that channel utilizations, you can see channels 1, 2, and 3, they are pretty much at 100% channel utilization. So if there was one of our access points in this area trying to use channel 1 to provide access for 2.4 gigahertz for some IoT devices or guest or whatever it may be, they're just not going to be able to access the channel because this device is constantly transmitting. So it's not great from a Wi-Fi performance perspective as well. So we definitely want to identify, track down, reconfigure, remove these devices if we can. But you might be thinking, that was 2.4 gigahertz. So we see these devices on any other frequencies? And well, Mac, you can tell us the answer to that.
Of course I will. So of course you can. So 2.4 is not the only frequency that is prone to interference. As you can see here, we can see like a small little tiny red triangle with a 5 inside of it. This is actually the most common interferer that we very frequently see on sites, because there is a slight disconnection between the, like the infrastructure team and the facilities team that are equipping the building with like security cameras. Maybe you are just renting out a floor and you will have some cameras like close to the lifts or close to the entrance to your server rooms, and those cameras very often will be wireless but not Wi-Fi, and they will still occupy the same frequency bands as we do in Wi-Fi because they are free to use, and that's what can happen. That single camera can kill a channel or 2 channels, or sometimes even more. So now you can see that entire Uni3 is pretty much killed here with a utilization hitting 100%. So that means that we simply cannot use those channels for Wi-Fi. So if it's not a super high density area, we don't care about it too much because we can just use different channels around the channels that the camera is using. But if we really need to have a very decent spectral reuse and have all the channels available all the time, then we are just creating a little bit of more CCI and therefore reducing capacity of our network because of these cameras. Imagine if we didn't have 3, if you had 30 of them, right? That would break havoc when it comes to the performance of our Wi-Fi network. Next slide. Okay. And finally, what you see here is a printer, okay? And this printer on this floor on 2.4, it covers half of the floor or more than half of the floor. And why is that a problem? The problem with that particular printer is that it has its Wi-Fi on. And you might ask yourself a question, but this is a Wi-Fi printer. I want to be able to print using Wi-Fi to that printer. Yes, but the printer will be connected to your corporate Wi-Fi and not broadcasting Wi-Fi, while perhaps being connected to a wired network, creating easy access, crackable access to your wired network. Probably, even if it doesn't pose a security risk to get access to your network. Look at the low data rates that Matt is now showing us. Even if we are just contributing using these low data rates, anything that we send to the printer sends to us, we are slowing everything down. On top of that, we have beacons that this printer is sending. And on top of that, we can have hundreds of these printers around the building. And we need to, honestly, either change the configuration or ideally plug it in and disable Wi-Fi. And that's on 2.4.
Yes. And you think, okay, that's just one device in one office example. Well, we wanted to show you another example of these types of devices being enabled. And what we've got here is what you can see, all the orange API icons here. These were the customer's access points in the environment. All of the access points highlighted in red, well, these were printers that were enabled around the office. So you can see the whole office floor is flooded with 2.4 gigahertz coverage coming from these printers that did not need to have their Wi-Fi enabled. So again, I saw a question come up in the chat or the Q&A earlier. Can Ekahau help me identify these types of devices? And, you know, we absolutely can. We do a survey with Ekahau and your Sidekick and Sidekick 2, we will automatically place the access points or these devices on a map for you so you can see where they are. You can see their configuration, how much of an impact it has to the performance of your Wi-Fi network from the coverage that they are producing. So you can then locate them, reconfigure them, remove them, whatever it is you would like to do with them. But we definitely want to do something here because you can see the channel interference that this is causing just on this one floor alone is 14. So a lot of co-channel interference from these devices that do not need to have their Wi-Fi enabled. But you might be thinking, that's 2.4 gigahertz. I don't use 2.4 gigahertz in my corporate traffic anymore. What about 5 gigahertz or even 6 gigahertz? Well, in this example, we're taking a look at another office where we are looking at the 5 gigahertz now. And all of the blue icons are the access points for the customer's environment. And the icons in red, these are these types of devices where you would go to wirelessly share your presentation to a screen. I'm sure you've all seen them in the wild, but what they were doing is they're broadcasting the wireless on 5 gigahertz, and they are causing lots of co-channel interference on 5 gigahertz. So we can see 24 CCI. That's because they're using wide channels as well. So these devices affect the performance of the Wi-Fi network for the customer's 5 gigahertz environment. So again, we can identify them, we can track them down, know exactly where they are on a map, get them reconfigured, and then we can improve the performance of our wireless network. And we have a beanie giveaway, or as Stu would say, a nook. Is it a nook? Is what you call him in Canada? He's got to find that unmute button. Now let's give him a second.
Right? No, that's a toque.
Toque. Okay, I was close. I knew it was something like that.
Yeah, let's be specific, right? Okay. It's a toque. It's a boot. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, everyone that registered, we're going to go through registrations, and we're going to be sending out some beanies to everybody that registered today. So take a close look at your emails from us, and we will be sending you out a beanie or a toque, however you'd like to call it. And I just want to say a huge thank you, especially to our super insightful guest, Mr. Phil Morgan. Oh, look at Stu modeling that for us now. How beautiful. Man,
well,
you just
he
want to
looks
wear
like a
that
hacker
right
now.
now it looks like Stu's going to start hacking your Wi-Fi networks. Everyone watch out.
Yeah, we better disconnect now. I'm worried.
I got to get my glasses on, right? My tinted glasses. Yeah.
Me and Mac, we can stay on for a few minutes to answer some of the questions. There is tons of questions in the Q&A and lots of great interaction in the chat. So me, Mac, and Stu, we will try and stay on to answer some of those questions. Unfortunately, Phil does need to drop at the top of the hour because he is teaching an ECSE class today. So I just want to say a huge, massive thank you to Phil. I feel like I am way more prepared for any kind of security implementations or anything to do with my Wi-Fi security now. Lots of amazing insight in today's webinar. So a big thank you to you, Phil, for coming on and sharing that with everyone today.
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay, we will relieve Phil, and then Stu or Mac, any questions that we would like to answer from the Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I know a couple of you got some mark there too, Mac, but I think some of the big challenges, I think, going through the questions here is, are we going to be able to roam efficiently, right? Some people still, you know, we were talking about this. Hey, can I go from WPA2 to WPA3? But we've discussed this. We shouldn't be, that transitioning network should try to avoid it as much as possible, right? That seems to be kind of one of the common themes here, is that as people are trying to kind of, you know, get ready, can I do WPA2 and 3 at the same time? And I think we've all experienced this in the past, right? Remember when we had WPA and WPA2, right? We were having clients disconnect all the time because they were using the same SSID, 2 different things, and then it was never working. And we're going back in and telling everybody, just forget your SSID and go back in again and redo it. So that seems, I think that's something where we need to hit home, is like, we're starting fresh with a new slate, right? WPA3, let's go do that moving forward. I think that's one of the things, is to try to help people understand. The one thing, I think I might have a couple other good ones here, were some folks asking about, where did it go? I love how Zoom kind of throws the question way back up there after you put it back.
Look at the upvotes. Like we have a new question on the top from Terry. Yes. Why a different SSID for each frequency? And the short answer for it would be that if you have the same SSID across multiple frequencies, then your devices, sometimes, not all the time, will be jumping between those frequencies. And you want your, let's say, corporate devices to stick to 5 or 6 gigahertz. So let's stick to 5 gigahertz for now, okay? Because this is still the most popular and will be for a long time. So if you have clean 5 gigahertz, you want your devices to stay there. If you have just 3 channels on 2.4, you probably won't be able to provide good quality of service on 2.4 because of a massive contention on that band with just 3 non-overlapping channels. If you have an SSID on 2.4 and 5, your clients will be jumping between 2.4 and 5 while walking around the office, and every time they will be losing connectivity because that's how it works, right? So you want to keep them on one frequency band. You might think, okay, why not using band steering? And band steering, it will ignore your association requests on 2.4 gigahertz a few times until your device, hopefully, fingers crossed, starts scanning 5 gigahertz and connects there, at which point, again, you've lost your connectivity. You might have forced, kind of, your client to connect to 5 gigs, but your voice conversation is over. If you have a single band SSIDs, then that's not a problem at all. So stick to single band SSIDs. It's a good practice. Okay, another question.
One little thing to what you were saying, Mac, is you might have seen some of our webinars before about when we talk about something called the green diamond, and it's always the client's decision on what SSID, what access point they're going to associate to when they're going to roam. So if you've got the same SSID configured across all of your frequency bands, 2.45 or 6 gigahertz, regardless if you've got band steering enabled as well, there could be a situation where your client device, for whatever reason, even if they were connected on 5 gigahertz, and when they go to roam to another access point, they may hear the beacon on 2.4 gigahertz first. They may have gone through their internal algorithm system to decide on what would make them associate to one access point over another, what we refer to as the green diamond, and they would then go from 5 gigahertz to 2.4 gigahertz, which, like Max said, is what you want to avoid. When you have single band SSIDs, you take that risk away and keep your clients connected to the frequency you want them to be connected to.
I've got a great this one. I got one for Phil here. Phil, how this is going to be a common theme here, and I think as we move into WPA3 and 6 gigahertz, is how are we to drive the message for billions of those networks out there that are just no security open? Like, they're going to be going to 6 gigahertz. Should they just be using an open SSID? Like, you go to a hotel, hospitality. What are your thoughts on that?
So it comes to convenience again, Stu, right? It's convenient to have an open SSID. Some people will argue that it's important to have encryption, but no one uses HTTP anymore. Most people use a VPN from the hotel. So a lot of people will argue that this is all a moot conversation. Like, I don't care if I make people use open SSIDs. They should all use VPNs, and it's a completely valid argument.
Right.
What we're trying to do is we're trying to save the stupid ones, Stu. How's that? Can I say that? Yeah. The ones that don't know they should run VPNs, right? We're trying to give them encryption because at the end of the day, when you come to my office and connect to my guest network in California, there's a lawyer out there at the moment thinking, Phil has liability for what happens on his network. So if you get hacked on my network, how liable is my company? So mandating OWE is another safety level where even though it's an open network, you are still getting encrypted, which means your data is safe. If you aren't smart enough to use a VPN and you think it's okay to telnet to your office from the Starbucks or the coffee shop or the airport or whatever, then you're going to be protected and safe. Can I say save the stupid ones? Are we not allowed to say that? We're trying to save the naive. And a lot of the things you're talking about, like Mac's comment about why do we force different SSIDs on different bands, is because if you let the client make the choice, the client could make a bad choice. That's why we need to force people to do things. It's the same thing with WPA3 still. We want to make people make good choices.
Absolutely.
Okay, and the very last question, since it's upvoted and it was there for a long time, from Amin, hi all, why when you put the AP on WPA2/WPA3, so a transition mode, some devices that can support WPA2 won't be able to connect to the AP anymore, while when you put in the WPA2, they can connect. So to simplify it, why some devices, older devices, won't connect when you enable transition mode? Do you know answer to this question, Phil? I've never seen that, to be honest. I've never had that issue.
So I think that that person needs some consultancy. So that shouldn't happen, Mac. There was a time where some vendors did a transition mode by advertising both WPA and WPA2. And then some clients went, whoa, I can't use both, so I'm going to not use either. There's something wrong with this SSID. You can't have both modes turned on, so they stopped connecting. So that should be fixed by client drivers. So I don't know of any reason today when you advertise WPA3 in transition mode, other than old drivers that need to be updated, why the clients shouldn't connect at WPA2 if you have transition mode turned on.
Cool. That's the same experience that I've had. Okay, cool. It's 8 past. So guys, thank you very much again, and terribly sorry for having you stay for a little bit longer. I hope it was helpful. Thanks again, Phil. Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar. As always, we are extremely grateful for you being here. We love it, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. So thanks a lot, guys, and we will see you in 2 weeks' time.
Yes. Bye-bye, everybody.
Ciao.